Hi, my name is Alexandra Fries, and today I'm going to talk to you about publications and storyboarding. Overall, we're going to go through general design principles, determine products and timelines, talk about how to workshop the content and layout for your publications, and then go over some recipes for success, and we don't want to fall into any pits. So for general design principles, some really important things are balance. As you can see, the first diagram here, these designs are symmetrical. This is really important for design because we want everything to be easy to read and look appealing. The bottom designs, you can see the left design is balanced, but the right design is not. It's drawing attention to the little tiny area in the upper right. We want to avoid doing this because we don't want to be attracting attention to specific areas, and we want this to be easy to read and understand. Proximity. So proximity of objects can be used to imply they are associated with one another, whether they're similar or different. It can also, as we saw before, cause attention to be drawn to a specific area. Alignment. A lot of times people want to, if they're doing a flyer or a pamphlet, do a center alignment, but it's actually been found in studies that this makes it more difficult for the reader to understand and read it. So we want to focus on mainly doing a left alignment, which will help the reader through the document follow it, from left to right. And so you can see the two examples here. Contrast and emphasis are really important, so we want to use contrast with color. Of course, we want to use color wisely, but you can use it to contrast. Contrast using different types or fonts, so having a serif versus a sans serif font, and contrast with the size of objects. If everything is the exact same size, it can be really boring and difficult for people to read because they don't know what the most important part is. White space is really important. This is something that a lot of people have trouble with because when you're looking at the layout of a document, you only have a certain amount of space, or we call it real estate. So you want to pack as much stuff into that space as you possibly can, but it makes it really crowded, and it's hard for people to read and navigate either a poster or even a newsletter or report. So you need some blank space. Don't be afraid of it. It allows for flow of your document. So you can see the ineffective versus effective examples below. As I mentioned, use color wisely. So when we want to choose a color scheme that has 2, maybe 3 main colors, a contrasting color, or it could be like a highlight color. In this example, the orange would be the highlight color, and the main colors would be the dark blue and the kind of teal blue on this report page. A light background and dark text is best. It has also been found easier to read than a dark background and light text for most people. And color should accentuate your content, but not distract from it. So if you have a lot of color everywhere, then people are going to be paying more attention to the design than your message you're trying to get across. Here we have an example of a 4-page spread of a newsletter. So depending on the size, we can use 2 or 3 column pages, and text boxes and visuals can take up 1, 2, or 3 columns. So you can see here in the first page, we're using 2 columns, but it's split into 3 parts. So one of the columns is the width of 2 small ones, and then we have another column. And this helps break up the document and really give it a good flow, but still make it easy to understand using the columns instead of just putting things scattered everywhere. Short and active titles. We really think active titles are extremely important. The title should summarize the key message. So people, if you have a poster, for example, people are going to look at their poster and they're going to look at the title. And if it's interesting to them, they might continue reading. Same goes for subtitles, right? Some people are just going to look at the pictures, some people might read the text you have, but the title is really what stands out, and it should make someone more interested to read. So it can be a statement or a question, and you need to be able to read it from 30 feet away for posters, although I would say a good rule is like 10, 12 feet. So the font size is going to have to be very large for the title. So you can see an ineffective title here. I'll read it aloud. Effects of photosystem 2 inhibiting herbicides on salt-excreting and non-salt-excreting mangroves with differing root morphologies in Mackay, Australia. Now, after reading that title, number one, the only thing I got out of it was Australia and mangroves, and I have no interest in reading further. I don't care about salt-excreting, non-salt-excreting, photosystem 2 doesn't mean anything to me. So having an active title that actually says the key message is much more effective. So if we read the second title, which is we've edited this title of a real poster, Stream herbicide concentrations reduce mangrove photosynthesis. Okay, that tells me flat out, what does this mean? Mangrove photosynthesis is being reduced. I know that's bad. Herbicides are reducing it. Okay, why? I want to know. So I'm going to keep reading and find out. Same goes for subtitles. This is something I see a lot at conferences and posters. The subtitle will be Introduction, Methods, Results. That's good for a scientific paper, and for most scientific posters, that's what you're going to see. But if you can change those single word or really boring titles into descriptive titles that are active, then you can guide your audience through your poster and really get them involved and excited about reading it. So for this one, our example is results, and sewage nitrogen evident in Nichiputi Lagoon and nitrogen load increasing. So we're saying we're seeing nitrogen from sewage in this lagoon and it's increasing. Okay, that sounds like a big problem to me. So I think if that's your results, it says a lot more than just results. Look into the text and read it. Use standalone visuals. So we talked a lot about science visualization already in this course, and you know some people may only look at your visuals and maybe read your captions. So each visual should have a caption for those people who want to read a little more, and each visual should be referenced in the text. And we just have an example here from Maryland Coastal Bays of benthic communities and health. And you can see we have a conceptual diagram with photos and an embedded legend. So all of these things together create the visual that can be looked at alone by itself. We just spoke about photos, so I'm not going to talk about this too much, but use photos and maps for context, not decoration. So provide good context with your photos, whether they are maps or other visualizations or aerial photos. Your photos should really deal with what you're talking about in the text. Don't just throw a photo in there of a pretty sunset because it's the best photo you have. Really reach out and take photos of your work so that you have them when you need them. And this is just an example from, I believe it's Assateague Island, of ecosystem features, and talking about nesting for the threatened piping plover. And we have a beautiful photo here of a piping plover. And you can see that we have a photo caption, which is very important. And the caption is distinguished from the rest of the text. It's smaller. It's a different font, I believe. So you can really tell, like, okay, this is part of the photo caption. It's not the text continuing and talking more in another column. Here's a few more examples of using photos. So the one on the left is ineffective. We have streamline reporting examples, also not an active title, but these photos have nothing to do with the text that's accompanying with it. Also on this page, it's very smushed together, where there's not a lot of white space. On the page on the right, each of the photo directly deals with what the text is talking about on the left. And we also have a photo caption, which says the top photo, middle, and bottom, so we can know exactly what we're looking at here and how it applies with the text. So determining products and timelines is really important. Creating your product. We always start with a sketch. Whether it's on a paper or a whiteboard, it's really important to sketch it out before you start using InDesign or other editing software on the computer. After you do a sketch, you can mock up an electronic version. So this will be a version, whether it's a poster, newsletter, report, that has examples of, here's a box and it's going to be a photo of this. You don't have to put the actual photo in yet, but just say what it's going to be. And that way you can start to see the layout of the page and how it's going to work. And we also have placeholder text in InDesign, which is a Latin text, and you can just fill text boxes with it. And so you can sort of see, okay, about how many words this is going to be, and this is where the text is going to be, and you can look at the flow of the document better. And so then you can see here in the bottom, the final document incorporates all the visual elements in design principles. So we have, first we had a bunch of photos in a table, then we had 2 large photos, and then at the bottom we have 2 large photos again, incorporating both the swirl of the shell as well as a photo behind it with the text in 2 columns. So I mentioned Adobe InDesign, and I think it's very important to use the right software because it's going to make your life so much easier. So InDesign is the best for doing publications. The files that are in the document can be linked, so a photograph will be linked to your document. It won't actually be part of the document, so the file size isn't getting really huge with all those files together in the same document. And it's the most functional of these 3 we're talking about today. Illustrator, which you've used for conceptual diagrams and science visualizations, graphs, is good, but the file size can get very large. You'd have to embed all of the images and things that are going to be in the document, so the files get enormous. And it's not very good to handle text as much, so it might be fine for a 1 page that's mostly images, but for the most part, InDesign's better. Finally, PowerPoint. I have seen some people use PowerPoint to print documents, and I would say avoid it. It's really difficult to print it or to have a professional looking document. It's not been designed for print application. Obviously, it's for presentations. And already we've talked about in other lessons of this science visualization course about color, and so Microsoft PowerPoint works in RGB, which is not the correct color for printing. We want CMYK. So if possible, focus on using InDesign. Having a timeline is really important, and determining exactly what products you want to create. So there are many products to consider, and each one takes a different amount of time or resources. The first one here in the example is a diagram, conceptual diagram, which you've done a few of so far. That can take you a matter of days, depending on how complicated it is, how much review she'll go over. Then a newsletter. Depends how long the newsletter is, but usually 4 to 6 to 8 pages. It takes you days to weeks to create a good newsletter that's going to be effective. I would say the same for a poster. Books. I do not recommend doing books unless you're really invested, as they can take months to years to produce and can be very time consuming and difficult. And finally, a website. So websites are really important, and nowadays everyone has a website. Depending on what your research is on, you may want to have a website as well. I think it takes a lot of time up front, but then it's an ongoing commitment. So you have to keep updating, creating new material, making sure it's up to date, the latest software and hardware requirements. So just looking at each of these briefly, conceptual diagrams, as we've talked about, they synthesize complex processes, and they can be incorporated into other products, such as presentations, publications, and the web. Low resource commitment and 1 to 3 days. Newsletters. They reach a broad audience and they're easy to distribute, not that many pages, the weight and everything. They're a moderate resource commitment, and a solid 2 weeks of work, you can create a good newsletter. Posters reach a broad audience. They're also easy to distribute, especially if you're taking one to a conference or another event. Less text and more visuals is better. So there is some time to create those visuals or select the appropriate ones. Moderate resource commitment, and also about 2 weeks, the same as a newsletter. A book conveys much more information, usually very in-depth. It might be necessary to have a book when you're pulling together many studies or doing a report on a huge area with a lot of information. It's a significant resource commitment. Here it says 2 to 3 years. Depending on how many authors you have and how many chapters you have, it could take longer than 3 years. A website. As I said, everyone has websites now almost. It reaches a broad audience, a mix of visuals and text. It's a long-term commitment to maintain it, not necessarily to create it to begin with. New resources need to be uploaded every week, whether they're publications, blogs, symbols, images, or media articles. And as I said, ongoing. So how do we come up with what's going to be in our publications? Workshop the content and layout. So you need to engage people on the project who are going to work with you, your staff and peers or other stakeholders. And the process of doing this can be just as important as the product. We've especially seen this with report cards. So we use a storyboarding approach, which is sketching out the main elements of the product using active titles, putting in placeholder text, putting in graphics that are placeholders, and ask participants to provide the required content. So if you're in a group and you're workshopping a poster and you need 4 photos, you can say, hey, so-and-so, I need a photo of this and a photo of this. Give me 2 of each and I'll pick the best one for this part of the document or this part of the poster. And that way they feel involved, they have a stake in this product, and you don't have to do all the work. Similarly with the text. If you have placeholder text, you can say, okay, I need 100 words about this part of the newsletter. And then you can give that task to someone and say, can you write 100 words about this? And 100 words is not a lot. So a lot of times they may write way more than you want and you'll have to cut it back. But at least you'll be getting the content in and you won't have to be writing it all yourself. But if you're doing this, make sure you're acknowledging the contributors. Everyone who is involved should be acknowledged. We do things a little differently from scientific journal articles, first author, second author. It's more important for science communication and science visualization that everyone is being acknowledged. That way they feel invested in it and they're engaged and they want it to be a good product in the end. Here's an example from Samoa of a report card or state of the environment for Samoa in the Pacific. And this is the sketch of what the front page on the left, the center spread, and the other 2 pages would look like for the document. This turned into another sketch you can see on the left. So that sketch turned into this inside spread on the right that you can see was created in InDesign. Some design elements, a lot of white space, huge conceptual diagram with a lot of visuals. And this is the example of what the cover ended up looking like in the end. So you can see originally it was, we need like a little fish here and maybe a tree, a mangrove, and some sort of Aboriginal design, a traditional design in the background with a word cloud. And that's what we ended up coming up with. Obviously it's a little bit different, but having these large images on the front was really powerful with still enough white space to not make it look too cluttered. Finally, recipes for success and pitfalls to avoid. So, make sure with your publication you're providing synthesis, visualization, and context. These 3 elements are really important for science communication as well as science visualization. Incorporate white space. Do not be afraid of white space. Sometimes I can be afraid of white space, not afraid of it, but I'll be trying to put too much into one document, and so you have to step back and say, okay, well, where can we cut some of this text, and can we make this visual a little bigger and have less text, or delete one visual if we have two and then only have one. Use the general design principles we've talked about. Use visual elements that are effective, so that really are connecting to what you're saying in the text. Photos that are applicable, maps that are, accurate to the area you're talking about. Choose a consistent style and format, so this can come with colors, fonts. Don't use different fonts on every page or the same page. Choose what you're going to use and use that consistently throughout. Use active titles and subtitles, so they're much more powerful than just results. We want to know what are the results so that our reader will keep reading. And use color, but use it wisely. So color can have a lot of meanings. We talk about stoplight colors. Red is bad, green is good for most cultures and most people. As well as having a color scheme with 2 to 3 colors you stick with throughout the whole document. Pitfalls to avoid. Taking too long to edit and review. Edit and review is really important when doing a publication, especially with your other stakeholders or partners or your colleagues. And you need that edit and review, and just because the document was one way in the beginning, it may turn out completely different by the end. But as long as everyone is involved in editing it and reviewing it, then that is where it will become a really good document. But you have to set deadlines. So if you need something to be reviewed in 1 week, when you send it out, say, all comments must be received by X date. Or else people will forget, they'll fall off their radar, it'll spend too much time being reviewed, and then you'll have less time to get it done in a time scale that's applicable for you. Losing control of the product. This can happen a lot. So if you outsource production to graphic designers who are not scientists, a lot of times they don't really understand the complete message of what you're trying to say. It's one of the reasons we're doing a science visualization course, right? Because scientists need to be good communicators. We need to be able to visualize things for people. But graphic designers obviously have that training and they're very good at what they do. But some of it might be confused if you just give it to a graphic designer, they take it, and then you find out this is not the right message and the story I was trying to tell. So it's better to have more control of the product, and that way you won't have to backtrack and say, okay, well, this is all wrong, and redo it, and those kind of things. Not having an outside review. So you can have a review of your stakeholders and people directly involved in the project, but then you also need a review of other people this will affect that are outside of creating this product or publication. You don't want to have a newsletter or a poster come out and then some other people also working in the field but not working with you say, oh my gosh, I can't believe this, I had no idea this was coming out. So it's really just good to be talking with your community and have some sort of review outside your group. Not allowing enough time. Small story of a book that we had from Florida, and we had a lot of people contributing, a huge product, and we didn't allow enough time to get it done, and it ended up taking 6 years. So having too long to edit and review, or losing control of the product, or not having an outside review and having flack come from it can make it so that your product takes a lot longer than you thought it was going to take. So building in enough time for people to review, for putting in edits, for having a second review is really important when doing a product. So this is just a quick example of soliciting feedback. This is from Assateague Island. It's a conceptual diagram showing physical features, ecosystem features, and human features of the environment. And you can see it has a legend below, and all of the text on here are edits for, a change of the order of the symbols in the legend, text, things that need to be added, things that need to be moved. And so this feedback comes from your colleagues and collaborators as well as stakeholders that are key in your group, and recognized experts as well. So this is what we had first. That was all those edits. Next, with the edits included, you can see that it's changed a lot. I'll just go back again. You can see It's bigger, it's cleaner, it has the edits that are appropriate incorporated. So that's everything. Thank you so much for watching this presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at afries@umcs.edu. Thanks.